Hey everyone, welcome to this deep dive. It's all about the future of learning to code. You actually sent over some really interesting articles and research pieces about coding in 2025 and beyond, so I'm super excited to unpack all of it with you and our expert. I know you're really interested in making sure that you stay ahead of the curve in tech, so that's exactly what we're going to explore today, just how much the coding landscape is changing. We'll be looking at everything from AI-powered learning platforms to those mind-bending VR and AR coding environments we've been hearing so much about.
Yeah, it's really amazing. The thing I think is so fascinating is how the way we learn to code is being disrupted. It's not like the old days anymore, just slogging through static textbooks and tutorials. It's much more dynamic now, almost a personalized experience.
It really is like the learning process has been completely reprogrammed. Like we've got these AI tools now, ChatGPT, GitHub Copilot. They can help debug in real time and even generate code for you. But do you think that at some point that could hinder a coder's ability to learn those fundamental concepts? Or is it more of a win-win situation?
That's a really great question. There's definitely a huge debate about that. These AI tools are incredibly powerful. There's no doubt about that. They boost productivity and help us learn so much faster. But we have to remember that they're just that tools. At the end of the day, we still need to understand the underlying principles of coding to use them effectively and properly. It's kind of like having a calculator. It can do all the math for you, but you still need to know what those numbers mean. And that actually brings me to another really cool development that we're seeing, which is immersive learning environments using VR and AR.
Yeah, for sure. The sources you sent over about those VR coding boot camps sound amazing. And these companies, immersive code VR. I mean, just imagine putting on a headset and then being able to collaborate with people from all over the world in a virtual coding lab, and we can actually visualize data structures in 3D. What do you think about that? I mean, could that kind of immersion actually accelerate the learning process?
Well, I definitely think the potential is there. It's almost like the difference between reading about a city and actually walking its streets. The level of engagement and experiential learning could completely change how we learn code, especially for visual learners.
Absolutely. Okay, so we've got AI shaking things up. VR is adding a whole new dimension to learning. But let's talk about something that's been around for a while but has really exploded recently, gamified learning. The sources that you pulled talked about platforms like Code Combat and Code Wars that have become these full-fledged RPGs where you level up your coding skills as you play. But are we actually learning valuable coding skills while we're having all this fun?
Well, fun is definitely a powerful motivator, right? I mean, gamification just really taps into our natural desire for rewards and challenges. It makes the whole learning process feel less like work and more like a game. And, some of these platforms are so sophisticated. They weave coding challenges into the gameplay so seamlessly.
I do wonder, though, if at some point we could get so caught up in the game aspect that we might miss out on a deeper understanding of the code itself. Are we just becoming experts at button mashing instead of understanding the mechanics behind those awesome combos?
Yeah, that's definitely a valid concern. I think the key here is to strike a good balance. Gamification can be such an effective tool for introducing coding concepts and sparking that initial interest. But at some point, we do need to go deeper and understand the underlying principles. We can't just rely on cheat codes forever.
Right, no cheat codes in real-world coding. Okay, so far we've got AI tutors, virtual coding labs, RPG-style learning platforms. What other cool new approaches did you find when you were doing research for this deep dive?
Well, the rise of project-based learning really stood out to me. Platforms like Scrimba and Front-End Mentor really emphasize this learn-by-doing approach, which is a very effective way to learn. It's like learning to cook. You can read all the recipes in the world, but until you actually get your hands dirty in the kitchen, you won't become a chef.
Yeah, and when you build these real projects, that's a great way to actually showcase your skills to potential employers, right? And speaking of employers, I noticed that our sources highlighted these things called micro-credentials and nano-degrees as an alternative to the traditional four-year computer science degree. So how do those fit into the future of coding?
Well, they're becoming increasingly valuable, especially in this fast-paced tech world. These micro-credentials and nano degrees are like focused bursts of learning. They target those specific skills that employers actually need. So it's a great way to demonstrate your expertise without having to go through a full four-year degree program.
So that's AI-driven learning, VRR coding boot camps, gamified learning, project-based learning, and these targeted micro-credentials all covered. What else did you find in the research materials?
I found the emphasis of community-driven learning really interesting. The sources that you sent over about these thriving online communities on Discord, Reddit, dev.po highlight how crucial it is for coders, both new and experienced ones to connect with each other, share projects, ask for help, get feedback.
It's like having a network of coding buddies all over the world. There's something really powerful about learning from each other's experiences. It's not just about, getting information from experts, but also about engaging in conversations with people who are on similar learning journeys.
Exactly. And that actually brings us to the last approach that I want to talk about in this section. It's something that I find quite interesting. Learning by teaching platforms like Exorcism and Mentor Crews are making these mentorship opportunities so much easier. The idea is that by teaching what you've learned, you can actually strengthen your own understanding.
So it's like by helping someone else climb the coding ladder, you're actually getting a better grip yourself. That's a pretty cool concept.
It is, and there's an added benefit too. It can help you build confidence and, hone your communication skills, which are so valuable in any field, but especially in the collaborative world of tech.
Yeah, that's a really great point. Okay, so we've explored some really fascinating ways that learning to code is evolving. It's gone from those traditional textbooks to AI tutors, from solo learning to vibrant online communities. But I have to admit, with all these talks about AI-powered tools and these super advanced learning environments, I'm feeling a bit, well, overwhelmed. Is it even possible to keep up with all of this?
I think it's important to remember that technology is a tool. It's here to help us, not to replace us, so we don't need to become experts in every single new technology, but rather focus on understanding how these tools can enhance our learning and make our work better.
So it's not about becoming a master of AI or conquering the VR coding universe, but about being adaptable and knowing how to use these tools effectively. So it's like we're the conductors and technology is the orchestra, right?
Yeah, I like that analogy. And as the conductor, it's super important to focus on the fundamentals. No matter how advanced these tools become, the core concepts of algorithms, data structures, problem solving, those will always be the foundation of good coding.
Right? Don't get so distracted by the shiny new instruments that you forget how to actually read the music. Speaking of staying grounded, what other key takeaways or advice did you find in your research that would help someone who might be feeling a little lost in the code jungle?
One thing that came up again and again was the importance of staying curious. The tech world changes so rapidly, so you have to cultivate a mindset of continuous learning.
So follow those tech blogs, subscribe to those coding podcasts, watch those YouTube tutorials. It's all about immersing ourselves in the world of tech to stay informed and inspired. So we're like digital explorers charting the ever-expanding frontiers of code.
Exactly. And kind of along those same lines, another piece of advice that really resonated with me, especially if you're trying to get into the tech industry or level up your career, is to build a portfolio.
Right? It's not just about what you know, it's about what you can do. It's about showing, not just telling. So platforms like GitHub or your own personal website become these digital showrooms where you can display your coding creations for the world to see.
Precisely. And don't be afraid to get creative with it. Build projects that you are actually passionate about, experiment with new technologies, and collaborate with others. Your portfolio is your chance to shine, so make it count.
It's interesting because you mentioned collaboration, and earlier we were talking about online communities and mentorship. It seems like the stereotype of the lone coder, hunched over a keyboard in a dark room is becoming a thing of the past.
Definitely, coding is becoming much more collaborative, whether it's working on open source projects, participating in hackathons, or even just bouncing ideas off other coders in online forums. The ability to communicate and work well with others is essential.
So we've talked about the importance of fundamentals, staying curious, building a portfolio, and embracing collaboration. But what about the mental game? I mean, coding could be really challenging and sometimes even frustrating. How do we deal with those inevitable moments of doubt? Did you get any insights on that from the research?
Well, coding is a process, and a big part of that process is trial and error. You're going to come across bugs, you're going to hit roadblocks, and that's completely okay.
So it's not about avoiding failure, but about learning from those mistakes. It's like we're debugging our thinking as much as we debug our code.
Exactly. And that leads to another important point. Don't be afraid to ask for help. Whether it's reaching out to your online community, consulting the documentation, or connecting with a mentor, there's no shame in seeking guidance.
It's like even the most experienced coders had to start somewhere, and they probably didn't figure it all out on their own.
Absolutely. And remember, coding is a journey, not a destination. There's always something new to learn, a new challenge to tackle, and a new skill to master. Embrace that continuous learning process and enjoy the ride.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. We've talked about the evolving landscape of learning to code, the importance of staying curious, the power of community, and the mental game of coding. But I'm curious to hear your thoughts on something. With all these amazing advancements, do you ever worry that coding might become too easy?
That's a really interesting question. I think it's important to separate the tools becoming easier to use from the act of coding itself becoming easier.
So the tools can help us write cleaner, more efficient code, but the underlying logic, the problem solving, the creativity that goes into building something truly innovative, that doesn't change.
Exactly. In fact, I think these advancements will free us up to tackle even more complex and interesting problems.
So it's like now that we have power steering and GPS, we can focus on exploring new terrains and enjoying the scenery instead of wrestling with the wheel.
That's a perfect analogy. And as we explore those new terrains, it's crucial to remember that coding isn't just a technical skill, it's a way of thinking. It's a problem-solving mindset that you can use in so many different areas of life.
So whether we're building websites, designing games, or even just tackling our to-do list, the logic and problem-solving skills that we develop through coding can be applied in so many ways.
Absolutely. And as these advancements keep coming, I think it's really important to have those bigger conversations about the ethical implications of these powerful technologies.
That's a really crucial point because just like with any powerful tool, it all comes down to how we use it.
Exactly. It's our responsibility to ensure that these technologies are developed and used responsibly in a way that ultimately benefits humanity.
Okay, so we've explored the tools, the skills, the mindset, and even touched on some of the ethical considerations. But what really stands out to me is how accessible coding is becoming. It's not this exclusive club for tech wizards anymore.
I totally agree. The democratization of knowledge, especially when it comes to technology, is one of the most exciting things happening right now. It means that anyone with a computer and an internet connection can learn to code, no matter their background, age, or location.
It's like all those entry barriers are crumbling, and now the coding playground is open to everyone.
Exactly. And that brings us to an important question for you. With all these incredible developments, all these different paths to explore in the coding world,
What aspect of coding in 2025 sparks your curiosity the most? What really resonates with you?
that's a fantastic question, and I think it's one that each person needs to answer for themselves. It's about finding what truly ignites your passion in the world of coding. Is it the potential of AI to personalize those learning experiences, or maybe the immersive power of virtual reality, or perhaps the excitement of gamified learning?
And I'm drawn to that idea of stepping into a VR coding environment. It just seems so futuristic and cool. But I can also see why people love those AI-powered learning platforms that adapt to your pace and style. It's just amazing to have so many options available to us.
It really is. And I think that's definitely something to celebrate. We're not limited to just one way of learning anymore. We can choose the paths that work best for our own individual needs and interests. And who knows what incredible new approaches to learning will come out in the years to come.
That's what makes all of this so exciting. We're right on the edge of a revolution in learning, and coding is leading the way. So if we wrap up this deep dive into the future of learning to code, what's the one piece of advice you'd give to someone just starting out on this journey?
I'd say embrace the journey, be curious, be persistent, and don't be afraid to make mistakes. The future of coding is so bright, and it's waiting for you to shape it.
That's fantastic advice. It's not about getting to some finish line far off in the distance, but enjoying the process of learning, growing, and creating along the way. And remember, there's a whole community of coders out there ready to support you on this journey. So keep exploring, keep experimenting, and keep coding. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Yeah, it really is. And you get an added benefit too. You can build confidence and, really hone your communication skills, which are so important in any field, but even more so in the collaborative world of tech.
That's true. Okay, so we've covered all these really fascinating ways that learning to code is evolving. It's gone from those traditional textbooks to AI tutors and from solo learning to vibrant online communities. But I have to admit, with all this talk about AI-powered tools and these super advanced learning environments, I'm starting to feel a bit, well, overwhelmed. Is it even possible to keep up with all of this?
I think the most important thing is to remember that technology is a tool. It's here to help us, not to replace us. We don't have to become experts in every single new technology that comes out. Instead, we should focus on understanding how these tools can enhance our learning and our work.
So it's not about becoming a master of AI or, conquering the VR coding universe. It's more about being adaptable and knowing how to use these tools in a way that makes us better coders. So it's like we're the conductors and technology is the orchestra,
I
right?
really like that analogy. And as the conductor, it's crucial to focus on the fundamentals. No matter how advanced all these tools become, the core concepts of algorithms, data structures, problem solving, those will always be the foundation of good coding.
Right? Don't get so distracted by the shiny new instruments that you forget how to read the music. Speaking of staying grounded, what other advice or key takeaways did you find in your research that would help someone who might be feeling a little lost in this code jungle?
Well, one thing that kept coming up was the importance of staying curious. The tech world is constantly changing, so you have to make sure you're always learning and growing.
So follow those tech logs, subscribe to the podcast, watch the YouTube tutorials. We have to immerse ourselves in the world of tech to stay informed and, stay inspired. We're like digital explorers charting the ever-expanding frontiers of code.
Exactly. And along those same lines, one piece of advice that really stood out to me, particularly if you're trying to get into the tech industry or level up your career, is building a portfolio.
Yeah, it's not just about what you know, it's about what you can do. It's about showing your skills instead of just talking about them. So platforms like GitHub or a personal website, those become like digital showrooms where you can display your coding creations for the world to see.
Precisely. And don't be afraid to get creative, build projects that you are passionate about, experiment with different technologies, collaborate with other people. Your portfolio is your chance to shine, so make the most of it.
It's interesting because you mentioned collaboration, and earlier we were talking about those online communities and the importance of mentorship. It seems like that stereotype of the lone coder, the one hunched over a keyboard in a dark room, that's becoming a thing of the past.
Definitely, coding is becoming much more collaborative, whether you're working on open source projects, participating in hackathons, or even just, bouncing ideas off of other coders online. The ability to communicate and work well with other people is essential.
So we've talked about the importance of fundamentals, staying curious, building a portfolio, and embracing collaboration. But what about the mental side of things? I mean, coding can be so challenging and sometimes just plain frustrating. How do we handle those moments of doubt? Did the research offer any insights on that?
Well, coding is a process. And a big part of that process is trial and error. You're going to encounter bugs, you're going to run into roadblocks, and that's perfectly fine.
So it's not about trying to avoid failure altogether. It's more about learning from our mistake. It's like we're debugging our own thinking process just as much as we debug our code.
Exactly. And that actually brings us to another really important point. Don't be afraid to ask for help, whether that's reaching out to your online community, looking at the documentation, or connecting with a mentor. There's absolutely no shame in asking for guidance.
Right. I mean, even the most experienced coders out there had to start somewhere, and chances are they didn't really all alone.
Exactly. And always remember that coding is a journey, not a destination. There's always going to be something new to learn, a new challenge to tackle, and a new skill to master. So embrace that continuous learning process and, try to enjoy the ride.
Okay, so we've covered a ton of ground here. We've talked about how the world of learning to code is changing the importance of being curious, the power of community, and the mental game of coding. But I have to ask you, with all these amazing advancements, do you ever worry that coding might become too easy?
That's a really interesting question. I think we need to make a distinction between the tools becoming easier to use and the actual act of coding becoming easier.
So the tools can help us write code that's cleaner and more efficient, but the underlying logic, the problem solving, the creativity that goes into building something truly innovative, that part doesn't change.
Exactly. And I actually believe that these advancements will free us up to tackle even more complex and more interesting problems.
It's like now that we have things like power steering and GPS, we can focus on exploring new places and enjoying the scenery instead of, wrestling with the steering wheel all the time.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. And as we explore those new territories, it's important to remember that coding isn't just a technical skill, it's a way of thinking. It's a problem-solving mindset that you can apply to so many different aspects of your life.
So whether we're building websites, designing games, or even just managing our to-do lists, those logic and problem-solving skills that we learn through coding can be applied in so many ways.
Absolutely. And as all these advancements continue to unfold, I think it's really important to have those bigger conversations about the ethical implications of these incredibly powerful technologies.
That's a really crucial point because just like any powerful tool, it all comes down to how we choose to use it.
Exactly. We have a responsibility to ensure these technologies are developed and used responsibly in a way that ultimately benefits humanity as a whole.
Okay, so we've explored the tools, the skills, the mindset, and even touched on the ethical considerations. But I think what strikes me the most is how accessible coding is becoming. It's not this exclusive club for tech geniuses anymore.
I totally agree. The democratization of knowledge, especially when it comes to technology, is one of the most exciting developments of our time. It means that anyone with a computer and internet access can learn to code regardless of their background, their age, or where they live.
Yeah, it's like all the barrier to entry are crumbling and the coding playground is open to everyone.
Exactly. And that brings us to an important question for you. With all these incredible advancements, all these different paths to explore in the world of coding, which path are you going to choose? What really speaks to you?
It's a great question, and it's something I think everyone needs to figure out on their own. It's about finding that thing in the coding world that just, really lights that fire inside of you. Is it AI's potential to make these learning experiences so personalized? Or maybe it's the immersive power of VR. Or maybe it's, the excitement of gamified learning. What is it for you?
That's a tough one. Honestly, for me, I think I'm really drawn to that idea of, stepping into a VR coding environment. It just seems so futuristic and cool. But I can definitely see the appeal of those AI-powered platforms that can adjust to your pace and style. It's pretty amazing to have all these different options.
It really is, and I think that's something worth celebrating. We're not stuck with just one way of learning. We can actually choose the paths that work best for us and what we need and, what we're interested in. And who knows what kind of crazy new learning approaches will come up in the next few years.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's what makes this whole thing so exciting. We're like right on the verge of a learning revolution, and coding is leading the charge. So, as we wrap up this deep dive into the future of learning to code, I'm curious, what's the one piece of advice you'd give to someone who's just starting out on this journey?
That's a good question. I think the most important thing is to just embrace the journey, be curious, be persistent, and don't be afraid to make those mistakes. The future of coding is bright, and it's out there just waiting for you to shape it.
That's great advice. It's not about reaching some far off finish line. It's all about, enjoying the learning process, the growing and the creating along the way. And don't forget, there's a huge community of coders out there who are ready to support you every step of the way. So keep exploring, keep experimenting, and keep coding.
Absolutely well said. And thanks everyone for joining us on this deep dive into the future of learning to code. We'll see you next time.